sequence start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, on with the show.
Hi, I'm Jason Benjamin, and to me, happiness is the exact opposite of regret.
All right, Jason Benjamin, thank you so much, man, for taking the time for me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, we've known each other for a while, and as I was saying, it's one of the things that's really amazed me is just your ability to kind of pivot in some of your jobs that you've had in your career. You've been in the military, you've done fire, you've done law enforcement, rescue, EMT, and now even acting and stunt work. So have you always been wired that way to want to jump in and try new things as you go along?
Yeah, I have for as long as I can remember. And my mother would tell you, if you were to ask her, that when I was a kid, all those jobs you said that I just did, I used to tell people when I was a kid that I was going to do those. I was going to be a police officer, a firefighter, a doctor, and a stuntman. And I became a police officer, a firefighter, advanced EMT, and a stuntman. So yeah, I don't know if it's ADD or what. I get bored easy, or if I just, I don't know. I've never stopped trying to push myself, I guess.
And even with, I was just thinking, even with the stunt work, I mean, you really have a background of service and helping others. I mean, is that something that fulfills you, and you love to do that to help somebody else?
Absolutely. When I was 15 years old, I became a lifeguard here in East Tennessee, where I live, at a county park out on the lake. And the first season that I worked as a lifeguard, I wound up saving 3 different people during the course of that summer, literally saving their lives. And I said then that I would always be doing something like that. The feeling that I got from being able to make a difference like that, that's what led me into, military and then public safety after that, and, combined 36 years of service after it's all said and done. That was something. I got bit by that bug when I was just a teenager.
Wow. Did you ever have any times as a lifeguard where you were scared and thought, like a dangerous situation that you had to save someone?
Not that I remember. What I remember most about it, and it's been several years ago, but what I remember the most about it was the feeling really anxious when I decided the very first. I'll never forget the very first life I saved. It was an older gentleman. He probably looked like I do now. I remember he had gray hair and was out swimming in the beach area that I lifeguarded at. Had these 3 fixed docks out in the deep end of the roped off swim area, and he was swimming behind them back and forth. And he was one of dozens of people that were out there swimming that day. And I remember not seeing him come out from behind one of the docks. And when I made the decision to go in after him, everything seemed slow motion. And I remember feeling really anxious about, it's weird that I remember this. That was, 30 something years ago. I remember thinking, am I going the right direction? Am I, and I found him. And it's just a blur. But that was when I brought him in, and of course everyone saw what was going on, and the other lifeguards came down to help me get him out. It was at that moment that I knew, this is what I'm destined to do, stuff like this.
It just hit you.
To this day, I still own a company that teaches water rescue, among other things.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, when you're doing the right thing, I think it just, it hits you, and you, like you say, you get bitten by that bug, and it carries through.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did you first get into anything to do with the entertainment industry, into acting?
Again, so I knew when I was about 7 or 8, 6, 7 years old, something like that. My mother and stepfather took me to a place over in Maggie Valley, North Carolina. It was called Ghost Town. People around my age from this area, from the Southeast, will remember that. it was kind of a Wild West theme park. And we saw they have one of the big attractions at that thing was the big shootout where the bank robbers come in and the sheriff and his posse, meet them out in the middle of the town square because everything it looked like the back lot of a movie set, studio. But they got into this big gunfight, right? And all the visitors are literally lining the streets watching it. So, like, I remember one of the cowboys came running by me, trying to hide from the sheriff, and they were getting shot off of horses. One guy came out on the roof of a building across the street from me. The sheriff shot him, and he fell off. And I remember looking at my mom and stepdad, and I was smart enough to realize they weren't really killing each other, but I couldn't figure out how they were falling off the top of a building and landing in the street. And they told me, well, those are stuntmen. And I asked, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? And they said, when you watch a movie and you see people fighting or crashing cars or getting thrown through the windows and stuff like that, those are stuntmen and stunt women. And I said right then, well, I'm going to do that when I grow up. I'm going to do that too. And at about 13 years old, my grandfather, my father's father, was a real big fan of the arts and theater, musical theater in particular. And he took me to see, I had no desire to go watch a musical at 13. But I absolutely loved my grandfather to death. I would have gone anywhere he wanted us to go. We were very tight, spent a lot of time with him. And so he wanted to take me. He saw something in me. He knew that I would be drawn to that type of stuff. And he took me to see a show called Hello, Dolly, which was a musical. It was at the Oak Ridge Playhouse. It was community theater, but it was very professionally done. And before the first act was over, I was on the edge of my seat, and I looked at him at one time. I remember vividly, and I said, I'm going to do this when I grow up. And he said, I kind of thought you might. So I, at an early age, was introduced to that stuff. And of course, you got to understand, this is long before the internet or anything like that. So being able to find out how to get into it took some time. It took longer than I would like. But once I've never been afraid to try much. And for whatever reason, I've never looked at failure as a bad thing. I've read a lot of books and listened to a lot of podcasts over the years about other people writing books and making a lot of money talking about this stuff, but it would just kind of, I don't know how else to say it, in a lot of ways came natural to me to not be afraid to fail, not be afraid. I was a class clown as well, so I wasn't afraid if somebody laughed at me. In fact, I enjoyed that. There was just attention, I liked it. So that never scared me. And I never was afraid of getting hurt. That was tough. I remember my father telling me when I was a kid, if you're going to be stupid, you better be tough. And I was pretty stupid at some of the things that I did. So I guess I kind of grew up tough as well. But it took a while. I got into it in high school, started doing theater. And that was my first, introduction into performing arts.
What do you equate that vision to? It sounds like you knew exactly when you saw that, you knew one day I'm going to do that.
I don't know. It's just how I was born. I wish that I've had people over the years. I've done a lot of public speaking at a lot of schools by my own choice. I never had a much desire to go and try and tell adults how to be successful in their life, but I always was kind of drawn to working with kids and get along with them well. So I've talked to a lot of different school groups and church youth groups and stuff. And people have asked, how I did all of it. And I told them, I think the secret is just don't be afraid to try it, just go out and do it. And if something were, if something interested me, if something piqued my interest, I wasn't afraid to give it a try. Now, as a result, I have realized, and I can say with a great deal of authority, there are a lot of things I'm really no good at. and it probably never will be. But there are a few things over the years that I just kind of took too naturally. Performing was one of them, acting. I've always been an athletic kid. Played sports all my life, and so the stunt stuff was kind of came easier to me than some of the other folks that I kind of came up with in the business. And I've never, like I said, I've never been afraid to look foolish. So falling down, fighting, acting, doing a comedy, doing a, period piece or whatever. I've never had a problem doing any of that stuff. It just was, it took a while. I sucked at it when like anybody, acting is an art form, and, no more than I could just pick up a paintbrush and paint a masterpiece. I could definitely never get on stage and without a lot of training and practicing and be any good at it. Not that I think I'm that good at it, but I keep getting work. So I'm doing something right.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think today that kids, maybe that are trying to come up into the business, that it's not afraid. I mean, they are afraid to fail. I think that everything, when they put up videos or on YouTube or social media, everything looks polished. And I think we live in this society that people are afraid to fail now. And I think there's something to that where if you're going to go out there and live and you're going to go and try something, you've got to be okay with falling on your face, or it's.
Oh, absolutely. And being judged. That's the thing. That's, now you get canceled if you say anything halfway derogatory or negative about somebody. But when you put yourself out there, so this is one of the things I don't understand about a lot of the social media stuff. I mean, if I make a video and I post it for the world consumption, and people are just mean. I mean, people are mean. There are Instagram pages that people go to just to read the comments, the bad, sarcastic, often funny comments that people are saying about each other. So it's like you're putting yourself out there and expecting to not get made fun of. Then the problem is with you, because that's what's going to happen. We all know it. So if you are putting yourself out there as an actor, as a whatever, you're going to be judged. You're going to be. I was already well into the business when social media became a thing, and there are clips of stuff that I had obtained throughout the years that I posted that I wish now I'd never put them on, because they're always out there. And I'm like, man, I was so bad at what I was doing at that time. It just doesn't, that's not what I want to represent me. But I have to realize now, we didn't at the time when it first became a thing, but that stuff is always out there. Always out there. If I were to ever run for any kind of public office, there's no telling what kind of stupid videos of some of the, projects that I've worked on in the past, the short films, and just really bad acting, or bad, physical stuff, the bad stunt stuff, before I really came into my own in that field as well.
But all that builds you into what you are now. So it's kind of like a scrapbook of looking back on how far you've come, and there's something to be said for that. What do you tell kids who come up to you now and want advice on A, getting in the business, and then B, how do you tell them, do you warn them about, okay, you're going to hear no, you're going to get rejected? Do you think kids now are built strong enough to resist that and keep going? Or do you think it's harder now than like when we were coming up?
Man, there's a lot to unpack there. So there's a few things that I would answer in that. One, I do have a lot of opportunities, and have had over the years when I'm talking to young people, to answer their questions about, how did you get started, or what should I do? All the questions that anyone would ask when they're trying to start into something new, whether it's acting or IT or whatever. And so I do tell them, there was a time, if you just watch social media, let me start all of that by saying this. So I don't understand completely the algorithms that go behind, the videos that pop up on the feed. What I do realize is I have young grandchildren, and so I watch a lot of videos now of things about being a grandfather or being a parent, and so that is what floods my streams whenever I pick up Instagram or whatever. Those are the kind of videos that I've been watching. I have friends that are very politically opinionated, and the videos that they will forward me are all of the same, the same thing. It's always saying the same stuff. And so what I realize is, if you're online looking for stuff and you're looking for videos of people getting made fun of, that's what's going to be sent to you. That's what you're going to receive every time you log into that platform. The real world is exactly like that in my experience. When I go out and I start looking, I start hanging out with people and making friends. When I have aligned myself with people that are successful, that are motivated, and that want to do well, and are serious about their art or their profession or whatever, their hobby, whatever it is, then I seem to attract those kind of people. So that's what I tell them. Just in the same way that you can go online and search a couple of videos, and then every video like that from that point on is going to be sent to you. The world's going to do the same thing to you. So if you're hanging out with people that are holding you back, or are not supporting you in your dream, as long as it's realistic, then that's the kind of energy and people that you're going to continue to attract. I was giving a talk at a school years ago, and I had never said this. I always used kind of basically the same thing. A lot of time I was out there as talking to like a theater group or something like that, or theater club at a school. But I always had a message, and that was one reason why a lot of schools were asking me to come and do these little workshops, was because I always had a message, but it was disguised as, hey, here's some kind of fun, cool fighting thing we do in film and television. But I was at this one school, Oakdale, Tennessee, and I had never said this before to any kid, but I started off that presentation after the teacher introduced me, and I asked the class, I said, "Is anybody?" And these were high school kids. I said, "Has anybody in here ever been told by your teachers, your parents, adults that you look up to, that you can do anything in the world, you can be anything you want to be?" And in the back was the teacher of the theater group, and the woman that had introduced me to them. Those two women were sitting back there, and they kind of had this proud look, like, yes, we tell them that. And just about every kid in there raised their hand, like, yeah, we've been told that. Again, I don't know where this came from, but I said, I don't think that when they said that to you, they meant to lie, but that's a lie. And I saw the teacher kind of bristle up, she wasn't sure where I was going with it. And I said, and there was a young girl sitting in the front row, and I said, and she was very tiny. And I said, let's say, for conversation's sake, that your dream, and you're willing to do whatever it takes. You're willing to work harder than anybody's ever worked in the history of ever. But you want to become the starting center for the Los Angeles Lakers. Do you think you can make that happen? But you're willing to work harder than anybody's ever worked. And she kind of looked at me like I was stupid. And then I noticed all the kids kind of leaning in, like, well, wait a minute, he's speaking some truth here. Where's he going with this? And the teacher even did it as well. I was really kind of nervous that she was going to get mad at me. But the girl said, well, no, that's stupid. And I said, well, why is it stupid? You're willing to do it. You're willing to work as hard as anybody's ever worked, if not harder. Why couldn't you do it? She was like, well, because I don't know. I just can't. And I'm like, is it because you'll probably never be 7 foot tall? You're going to be competing for a position where people are like 7 foot tall and taller and huge. And that's, they genetically won the lottery for that position. You and I, not so much. Not going to happen. But now nothing says you couldn't be in the WNBA, and you may never be tall enough to be a center. But so you realize that, and you think, look, I'm not going to be 6'6". I'm going to be 5'6". So maybe I can really work on my ball handling skills, and I can be a really good 3-point shooter or a point guard, or, find something that makes sense. It's still doing the same thing. It's just, you're not going to be the starting center for the Lakers. It just won't happen. I don't care. There's no one that could convince me you could ever do that. Now, this was years ago before, I might be canceled today when people hear this, but I said, and she looked at me, she said, well, of course that makes sense. This little girl did.
Wow.
After the class, we had a wonderful, I was there with them for about an hour and a half. We did all kinds of stuff. They really were receptive after that. The teacher came up to me afterward and she was tearing up a little bit. She said, I know you don't know this. You have no idea. There was a girl in here that needed to hear that. And I said, I don't know where it came from. I've never said that in my life. Well, I know where it came from. That was a God thing, you know. But I know that now. I didn't know it at the time. But now every time I talk to kids, just about every occasion that I'm in, I'll work that question in somehow. So to go back to your question earlier, the kids, I think that they realize that I think deep down they know those things. And I used to worry that we were living in the times where everybody gets a trophy and nobody loses and everybody has to be happy. But that, you know, that's not the case. It's just like, the best way I could explain that is what I see. The reason that I worried about that is because that's what I was seeing online. And you nailed it earlier, where what I'm seeing online, you presented it from a different perspective of that it's all polished and it's the best they can do and everything. What I'm watching when I'm watching someone's post on whatever social media platform, that's not real. Yeah, they most likely have tried half a dozen times to get the pose right and the lighting right and the message right, and unless you go to one of these sites that post fail videos where people have, you know, are making a mistake or falling down or something, a lot of times it's not their most honest offering. It's what they at least feel at the time is their best offering. So I experienced that some when I first started. I've been in the entertainment industry long enough to remember when we used to actually have to go to an office and audition for a part in front of somebody. And then now it's, you know, everything's you submit a tape, which is to streamline the process. I understand it's a whole lot easier for the casting people, and they can reach out a whole lot further and draw from a bigger pool. I get that. There's a lot of good behind it. But also, if you submit as an actor, if you're submitting a taped audition, they are expecting this is your best work. You have sent me the absolute best take that you could come up with. So you in person, and that's kind of bad because if it just doesn't snap with them right then, they're not even going to give you a second look. Whereas in person, when I would go on auditions in person, they may see something in the way I walked into the room or the way I greeted the person at the door or something about me before I became that character they're looking for. Or we had an opportunity to connect on a personal level, which was something I was always really good at in auditions, in-person auditions. But they're expecting, you know, what I'm seeing of you right now, this is the best that you have to offer. And so that's happening online as well. So all that again to say, I've got to change, especially since I've, you know, been fortunate enough to talk to a lot of younger people, that I'm not as worried about our future as I once was, or if I just watched social media that I thought I would be. You know, as Gen Xers, man, if we had had the internet and able to, you know, with the imagination that we had in the 70s and 80s growing up, because we didn't have all this stuff. If you'd have given, you know, had that kind of imagination with today's technology, there's no kind. They'll tell what kind of crazy stuff would be out there right now.
Oh, imagine, trying to get into the business back then, and we have, you know, everybody was running around with camcorders and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
I mean, my gosh.
Yeah,
it's interesting, especially the in-person auditions. I mean, would you go so far as to tell somebody, you know, maybe do a setup of a read, or like don't just do the read? Do casting directors want to see any of that, or do they just want to get right to it and hear your lines for
in-person auditions, or the tape?
Well, like when you send the tape in, I mean, do they want you to do any kind of swagger and kind of walk into the frame, and I mean, or can you get away with that?
Usually no. Typically, now that I'm doing more of the stunt coordinating and behind the camera stuff, I haven't auditioned in a while. But before, you know, even when I do, they're typically very specific on what they want you to do, how they want you to slate.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's called when an actor, if I were taping an audition, I would look into the camera and slate. And typically they'll tell you what they want to know about you, who you are, where you're from, who you're represented by, who you're reading for, something like that. So I would look at the camera and say, I'm Jason Benjamin and then whoever my agent is, reading for the role of John or whatever. And then go right into having someone off camera reading the other lines with me, and then you act it out. And depending on which casting director you listen to, if there are props involved, like if I'm the scene is the guy's on the phone, I mean, it would be all right to pick up a cell phone and hold it, but you don't have to get all elaborate. If it's if somebody is holding a gun and walking up to look into a room, obviously you need to set it kind of wide where they may say all this, shoot wide, 3/4, whatever. Let us see how you handle, because what they're wanting to see is, does this person know how to handle a firearm? A lot of times you're not going to get those kind of things. There's going to be more dialogue based. They're just wanting to see how you read it. The thing that I missed about in-person auditions were that, like I said, that moment to come in and make eye contact and speak, and realize, okay, I learned early on, or realized early on, that casting directors were the hardest people and probably the most important people to get in front of. So I took every opportunity I do. A lot of the casting directors would offer audition workshops where they would, for a fee, allow actors to come in and basically spend an entire day with them in a classroom of other actors, while the casting director explained to them the process, what they look for, how they go about the casting process, blah, blah, blah. But then a big majority of that time would be, you would be given a set of sides, an excerpt from a script like you would for any audition. And they would allow you to read, that audition, and then critique you on it and say, okay, you did this, but try that. So what I realized very early on was, it was an investment, one, in me, because I was getting to hear straight from their mouth what they're looking for, where their head, what their process is. Also getting an opportunity to perform in front of them with no pressure. I wasn't auditioning for anything. I was just practicing. And so I knew that. But the biggest takeaway that I got from every single audition workshop that I ever took early on was, when that door opened to the room that they're sitting in and I walked in, they were praying to God I was the next one. I was the one. So a lot of actors would get inside their own head and be like, oh, they're going to hate me. They're going to judge me. What if I don't do it right? Blah, blah. Eventually I came at it from the moment I walk in. I get one chance to make an impression, first impression, but they're hoping that I'm it. They're hoping that I'm the person they're looking for. So already they're on my side.
Yeah.
Now it's up to me to just keep winning them over and show them what I can do, and show them that I have range, that I, and then I also understood fairly early on as an actor that if they give you direction, if they say, okay, that was good, now try it this way, that's not a bad thing. It wasn't because you messed up. It was because, well, they want to know, can he take direction? Is that the only way he can play that? Or does he have any kind of depth or range?
Yeah.
So again, I would have never known those things had I not sought out opportunities to train with them and practice and invest in my business, which was me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was never afraid of any of that. I was never afraid to, and I booked a tremendous amount of work from, the casting director that cast me in the movie Flight with Denzel Washington. I met her at one of those workshops and impressed her enough in that workshop that she remembered me. And then the next time I had an audition, because back in those days, she was still seeing people in person. The next time she saw me, she remembered me and cast me. It was the first thing she cast me in was a TV show on VH1 that Queen Latifah was the executive producers on called Single Ladies. And then I got typecast a lot as a cop in those days. One, because of my build, I look like the stereotypical cop, but also because having had been a cop for 7 years, I could walk and talk and act like it and understand it. But then she cast me against type for the movie Flight, which actually at the time, the original role that I had, the original script, was a big role. I was set to work for 3 weeks on it. It was I played the business partner of the owner of the airline that Denzel's character flew for. And originally, I had gained a lot of weight, bulked up because the original script, he owned an NFL team. They had a hard time finding a NFL stadium to shoot in, so they changed it to a Major League Baseball. We shot at the old Brave Stadium in Atlanta. But I had a backstory, and it was a big part for me. Would have been huge. They wound up cutting it because it was the last stuff that we filmed of that whole process. So they kept cutting stuff. So I went from working, initially being hired to work for 3 weeks, down to 2, down to a week, down to 3 days, down to 1 14-hour day instead. That's what we wound up with. And I think I got like 2 scenes out of it. But she told me when I came in that she was casting me against type because I'd always played a cop or, prison guard or something, security guard. And she was casting me as a businessman because she knew that I'd earned the opportunity to do that and that I could do it. So it helped. Put a lot of miles on my truck back in those days, going to study and read and practice and train with anybody I could.
But that's part of it. That's part of the journey.
Absolutely. It's part of my process too. I've never halfway done anything. I've just never been a half. I'm all in or all out. That's just who I am.
Do you think the military and law enforcement and fire and rescue, did that help mold you to be able to do that, where you've got the mental toughness to put up with that process and to not do things halfway, to go all the way? I would think that having a mission, I would think that would kind of help you along that journey.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I think it, I think in a lot of ways I inherently had some of that in me. I think going into the military, right, I could have gone to college and played ball. But I remember talking to my father my senior year and saying, look, I hate school. I just hate going to school. I without trying, I was making, B's and C's. It was just, I was bored with it. I didn't apply. I was a lousy, lazy student. I was interested in theater and sports and just school. The whole process was just boring to me. I knew college was not going to be a good fit for me. I knew that if I went, that I would wind up flunking out. And I just truly didn't like playing sports enough that I wanted to put up with 4 more years of school. But I was smart enough to know. I grew up in a small town in East Tennessee, and I knew that there's not a whole lot going on here. And I didn't want to stay here. I wanted to go out and see the world, man. And so I talked him into letting me, join the military. A friend of mine at the time had joined the Navy on what was called the delayed entry program. He was still in high school. And his recruiter happened to be at my high school one day. And I thought, man, that's a cool uniform. He was a Navy chief petty officer, had his summer whites on. And I thought, man, that's kind of cool. And all the girls were checking him out. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I really like it now. And then, I was 17 years old, and they promised to send me around and show me the world. And I thought, well, that's what I want to do. What I learned, the discipline and everything that I learned in the military, and then I carried that into I became a police officer right out of the military for 7 years. until I was able to switch over to the fire department. That fire service was a lot more conducive to my personality, being part of a team, um, showing up to fix something and, make a change before you leave. I could spend a whole day talking about, why it's so tough being a police officer, but that's one of the coolest jobs I ever did. And I still have some, you know, friends that I've look at as family from when I did that, 30 years ago. But I think it just took what was in me already, but was raw, and shaped it into the man that I eventually became.
Wow. You're you're a tough guy. You've got the mental toughness, physical toughness, and you go all the way. And has there ever been a time in your life where you really got beat down and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to survive this? Like not necessarily in any of the service that you've done, but any time in your life where you really had to dig deep and try to find a way out of the dark place.
Absolutely. So a lot of people don't know about me is that after, over 30 years of military and public safety, um, I was pretty in a very, not pretty dark, in a very, very dark place, personally and emotionally. Diagnosed with PTSD eventually, but I got promoted to the rank of captain in the fire department. So I had a group of people that worked with me, that I was ultimately in charge of. I was the leader, and so like I said, I don't halfway do anything. So I read every book, took every course that I could about leadership and communication and all that. I wanted to be as good as I possibly could and understand the process and mentor. I'll take my role as a mentor seriously and offer the best advice that I could find out there. And all the while, still dealing with everything that, police, fire, EMS sees on a daily basis. In my 32 years of public safety work, I've had occasions to go on calls where a civilian, someone not affiliated with public safety, experienced that, not as a victim, but just saw what we were seeing, and that messed them up for their entire life. That one instant gave them PTSD for the rest of their life because of what they saw. They weren't physically experiencing it. They weren't involved in it. It could be whatever, a wreck, a fatality wreck. But just seeing that changed their whole life, gave them PTSD from that one time. We see that stuff for 30 years. I saw that stuff for 30 years. Dead children, doing CPR on babies, telling someone that we did everything we can, but your wife of 40 years is gone. We couldn't save her. Or pulling people out of car wrecks and house fires, and being in shooting situations. Just everything you can imagine that a cop, fire, EMS would encounter. So by about the 25th, for about the 25th year in the industry, from about 20 to 25, I was just a different person. It changes you. You don't see the world the way everybody else does, because your job is dealing with everybody's emergency, right? Everybody else's problem becomes yours. And it for people like me who are full of empathy and genuine love, it's difficult. And I don't think that anybody that does any of those jobs for any length of time doesn't have that in them somewhere, at least in the beginning. But humans aren't meant to see that stuff, especially not every day, not as often as we do, and feel helpless and hopeless because you couldn't fix something. So by the mid 2010s, I was in a pretty dark place, very dark place, and wound up getting, I've had multiple marriages, like a lot of first responders. Never was very successful in relationships. The film and television and the pretending to be someone else was always an escape for me. So that was something that I would put a lot of my time and energy into, pretending to be somebody else, but it wasn't bad because that was my other job, and I had, a fire chief that thought it was absolutely cool as could be that he saw me on one of his family's favorite TV shows or, commercials or whatever. So I got support from those people doing that. But I never was really taking care of myself emotionally or dealing with or understanding what PTSD is. You didn't talk about those things back then. I early on in my career was asked to, because of my level of fitness and I'd worked as a personal trainer for years when I was a police officer, was sent off to become what they call a peer fitness trainer. So I could coach other people in my fire department on how to live healthy and work out. And, we did a lot of that. And early on, I started in 1991 in the fire and police stuff. And back then, there were on average around 100 line of duty deaths a year. And there was always this talk about how do we lower the number of people dying on the job. What's sad is, even still today, I believe, I haven't checked these statistics recently, but I would imagine it's still pretty much the same, that nowadays more men and women, public safety officers, husbands, fathers, brothers, cousins, are killing themselves rather than dying as a result of the job they're doing. Hmm. And I was aware of that. And I was like, why aren't we talking about that? I can teach you how to eat right and work out and stay healthy. And, at 50, I'll be 55 this year. And I'm sadly probably still in better shape than a lot of the 20, 30 something year old folks that are doing the job. But I think that's a whole nother subject, part of the depression and PTSD and the physically the toll it takes on you. I think that's a lot of the reason that you see so many responders out of shape, but I digress. I got to that place. I got to the place where I was having anxiety attacks, and when I hit them, I never told anybody about them. I lied to myself and said, I'm Captain Benjamin, man. People look up to me. I got 7 other firefighters that I'm responsible for in my station. If I show any kind of weakness or inability to lead or do my job, who's got them? Who's going to take it? And that was one of an extra burden that I placed on myself. And it turns out, I realize now, it was just an excuse to not have to deal with anything or admit anything. Long story short, I wound up in about 2016, 17. Getting to the point where I could be driving around and just crying. I'm like crying, ugly crying, and not, I can't tell you how many, meetings or appointments or things I would just have to ditch because I couldn't show up, look like I'd just been bawling, because I had been. And I didn't really know what was up. I just, I was aware that was wrong. Something wasn't right, but you just, like, that's stupid. You just deny, and hide. By about 2018, it wasn't the turning point for me, sadly, but I remember I was working for a fire department in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And the best way I could explain to myself or to anyone else what I was dealing with at that time was it just seemed like noise. Like everything in my life, every thought, every action, every consequence, every emotion, everything was like always fighting for my attention, and I couldn't focus on anything. It was just like white noise in my head. Couldn't focus, couldn't sleep, was angry a lot. gone from being the guy that would go out and work out with the guys at the station on duty to being the captain that sat in his office for the full 24-hour shift. Would sit in there, would sit in my office. And no, you know, they knew something was wrong, but they, you know, what were they going to say? I was the captain. Why would they come in and ask me what's up? But I found myself one day sitting at the marina in Oak Ridge and looking out at the water. The water has always been, that's kind of where my journey began. And I would always find myself going to the water and sitting and watching it and watching the ducks and the, you know, the waves and just, I always found peace there. But I didn't find any. And I was sitting at the marina there in Oak Ridge and crying, one of my ugly cries, and just thinking out loud. I said out loud, I just want the noise to stop. I just want the noise to stop. And my arm is up on the console of my pickup. That's where I carried my pistol. And I vividly had this kind of conversation in my head. It could all stop right now. I probably wouldn't even hear it. And I don't even know if I'd feel it, but it would stop. And that didn't seem stupid to me. That actually didn't scare me. That seemed like a viable option at that moment. And I would have never thought that that would be the case with me. But I truly felt that. And I sat there for a minute and I opened the console and I looked at it and I laid my hand on it. And I'm thinking, I would like that be done. I wouldn't hear it anymore. And I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel anything. I thought, man, that's easy. And I had, you know, kids and grandkids at that time. And I'm thinking, it never, and I feel bad about this in a way, but it just was it's what my story is. I didn't think about my family at that moment. I saw the face of every one of my guys. And I thought, man, if I do that, I'm Captain Benjamin. I know that that these guys have a great deal of respect for me. I knew that. I was confident in that. And I thought, if I do that, if I check out that way, man, what kind of message does that send them? What kind of hope do they have that they'll ever make it through this? And I'm like, I can't do that to those guys. I love them too much. And then I thought of my family. I'm like, oh, and my family too. But my first thought were my guys.
Yeah.
So sucked it back down for a while. It was another, probably over another year before it came to a head for me. And I'd been dealing with anxiety attacks, like full-blown panic attacks, but they never happened when I was Captain Benjamin. When I was on duty, man, I was able to compartmentalize and just focus. But in the last 2 or 3 years, it had gotten to the point where even at work, I was just overwhelmed. I was drowning. Literally felt like I was drowning. And I was sitting at work one night. It was in the evening, and I texted my chief, my fire chief, and I said, "Hey, man, I know you're off. It was like 6:00 or something." I said, "I got to talk to you. Can I meet you at your office?" And so he's like, "Absolutely, I'll be there." I walk in, and he said, "Hey, come on in, sit down." He had no idea what was going on, and we got along well. And I started one of my ugly cries, and he was just, I remember him sitting behind his desk like, "What, well, I don't know what to do here." And I finally
He's never seen you like that.
No, yeah. No one had. No one had. Here's, dude, I had the world by the tail as far as everybody knew. I was acting as an actor in blockbuster movies, television shows, traveling all over the country, being the stunt man. Dude, my life on the outside looking in from everybody that knew me was amazing. And in a lot of ways it was. But I finally told him, I'm like, man, I'm messed up. I don't know what's going on. I'm panicked. My marriage is over. I was married at the time to another woman. I'm remarried happily now. Now that I got me right, I figured it all out. It's been several years later. But when I said, I'm in a bad place and I can't do this anymore. And so we sat and talked, and he just kind of listened, and he said, I can't send you back to work. And I'm like, I don't need to be at work, man. I'm not the guy for the job anymore.
Hmm.
At least not now. I hope that I can be someday, but I can't. I'm a mess, man. I got to get me fixed up. And so I'm leaving. I'm standing up and I'm going back. He said, well, go back, take your stuff off the rig, go home. We'll figure this out together. And as I was walking out the door, he stopped me. He said, hey, Jason. And I turned back and looked. He said, what do I tell everybody? They're going to want to know what's going on. I thought, oh crap, man, I hadn't thought of that. But I didn't hesitate, man. I looked at him and I said, Chief, tell him the truth, man. We got to. I'm not the only one. I can't be. Mm-hmm. And until we start talking about it, nothing's going to change. Nobody's going to get any help. And he just looked at me. He had this, real loving, fatherly look. And he said, all right, I'll do that. And so I went back and my station that I was at was the furthest station in the city from headquarters. So I had probably a 20-minute drive back to my guys. And I'm thinking, Lord, what do I tell them when I get there? So I got back and I got on the PA and I told everybody, come to the kitchen. That's where I had fire departments. That's where everybody hangs out. It's the kitchen. And they're all kind of like, what's up, man? It's like 7:00 at night. Normally people just kind of go off and do their own thing or work out. So basically I just told them where I was at. I started crying and told them that, I hope they could forgive me and I hope I didn't disappoint them and let them down. And, that I wasn't that guy that, that was strong and had everything figured out, that I was hurt. I was messed up. And then I waited for them to, I expected them to be like, I don't really know what in my mind at that moment, I thought this is where they're going to make jokes or make light of the situation because it's awkward. That's not what happened. One by one, they started opening up. They came up, loved on me and cried with me and said, start telling me their stories. And
that could have been the greatest thing you ever did for your team, was to give them permission to open up.
Yeah.
Because I guess you found out everybody had been there at one time.
Yeah. Most of them, most of those guys, I was probably the most senior guy, obviously, there at the time as far as time on the job. I definitely had the most responsibility on the administrative side, but they've been dealing with the exact same calls, the same issues, the same things that I had. And they were telling me their stories and they started opening up and I could see, it was so beautiful. I could see them unloading this stuff. We sat there for probably 2 hours, I'm guessing, just talking. You don't talk about things like that
your feelings.
Talk about your feelings, but it was really cool. The very next day, I got a call from another firefighter on another shift, thanking me. He said, what he said was, I will say what he said, not for this reason, because it just shows you where those guys are at. He said, I wish I was half the man you are. And I'm like, I don't even know what you mean by that, man. And he said, everything that you are telling people, I've been dealing with this since January. And this was like middle of, it was like April, May, June. It was like July or August. He's like, I was too afraid to tell anybody, but you just put it out there. And I'm like, man, we got to start talking about it, dude. He's like, I wish I had that. I wish I had been brave enough. And I'm like, can't look at it like that, man. You did what you did. If you want to talk about it now, you can. I said, but I tell you this, dude, best thing I ever did was when I admitted it out loud to my boys, because it doesn't own me anymore. It's out there. I'm no longer hiding it, man. I feel 1,000 times better just having said I'm screwed up.
Wow.
That was the biggest, most positive change that I made. Now, I immediately wound up getting into therapy. I went through two different therapists before I found one that really, the first lady that they sent me to, Super wonderful lady. Just didn't work. I just didn't feel it. I didn't want to talk to her. The next lady that I went to was much older. In fact, she told me the very first day I was there, she was like, "You're probably going to be the last patient I take on, the new patient, because I'm retiring."
Hmm.
And I'm like, "Okay, well," but like the first day that I talked to her, I'm like, "All right, this is good." And for many, many months, I mean, it was not a quick process. It was, I had a lot of baggage to unpack. I had a lot of what I now know is called pre-service trauma, childhood trauma. You know, I was molested as a child by a friend of the family, something I'd never really dealt with. You know, I didn't talk about that stuff. It was in the 70s. You definitely didn't talk about that.
Right.
But I had a lot of things like that, instances of things like that growing up that I'd never dealt with, because you just, it was our generation. You don't talk about it. It's done. What are you going to do? How's
Just get through it.
talking?
Yeah.
Right. Suck it up, man. So yeah, it took a while, man. A lifetime of trauma, physical and emotional, to overcome and deal with. And now, I've told my story every chance I get. When COVID happened, I of course, film and television, the industry shut down. So I had maintained my EMT license, and called the director of the ambulance service in the county that I had worked in for 30 years, and went to work on an ambulance. And I asked him the first day I was in his office talking to him, because I had watched him grow up in this. I met him when he first got out of the Air Force and was a EMT going to paramedic school, working on an ambulance, and now he's running the whole show. So I mean, I'd known him his whole career. And I told him a little bit, kind of the Reader's Digest version of my story. And I said, whenever we have some in-service training, as police, fire, EMS, they have to do dozens and dozens of hours of continuing education and in-service training annually. I said, I'd like to be able to tell my story. I think it'll help somebody. And it did. The stories that I got from telling, people that, I didn't know all the folks that worked there at the time. It was a big department. Turns out, a couple of people said that I, saved their life. I don't know if I did or not, but they felt like I did, because they had been contemplating suicide themselves. And by me, standing up and telling my story, especially given all the extracurricular stuff that I had going for me outside of being a public safety, employee, no one would ever look at my life and think, man, I bet he's having a hard time.
Yeah.
That's just, you never look at anybody and tell if they're having a hard time.
And it's almost like nobody wants to be the first. And it's like, if you tell your story and get it out there, it kind of, I'm sure on all your guys, it kind of took the guard down, and they were able, okay, it's a safe environment to share what I've gone through. And
absolutely,
it makes me realize we don't really do enough, I think, for that. That is, people hear PTSD, and I think a lot of times they think, oh, they're sad, or,
right.
they what do you think we need to do as a society to kind of spotlight that more, and, talk about how many people out there are suffering?
I think there's definitely a lot more awareness globally than there was when I was still on the job. I retired. I left the fire service in 2019, never intending to go back into any of that. And then 2020, when COVID happened, I went back and worked for another 2.5 years, probably doing the ambulance thing. Helped them set up some programs that they were wanting to get going, and then went ahead and just retired out of the system. I think there's a lot of civilians, a lot of people, everybody's messed up, man. Everybody's got issues. Everybody has, trauma that they've experienced. I don't think it's a malicious thing that the public at large looks at anyone in public safety or in the military and doesn't immediately think, oh, I'm sure they're suffering. It's, it's like I put it this way once, when I see the neighborhood that I lived in before, when I was still married, we had in Oak Ridge, we had curbside garbage pickup, right? And I just took for granted that if I, you know, I didn't even have to move my trash can to the road, they would come up to the house and get it. But I would always put it out there, and I just took for granted that while I was gone that day, somebody was going to come get the trash, and that was their job. I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think about who they are or what their dreams were, their family, or, you know, if they were doing vacation that year. Or I hadn't thought about that. I never looked at them like that. It was just a guy that came and got the trash, right? And I just happened to be going to get mail one morning when they came by, and the younger guy, he was younger than I was walking down to get the trash, and I'm carrying it up to the edge. And as he gets within a reasonable enough distance for me to talk to him, I said, "Hey man, I really appreciate what you do." You would have thought I gave him $100. The look on his face, and he was like, "Thanks, man. You know, nobody ever says that to us."
Yeah.
And I'm like, I guess not. We just assume that's what you do, and you're doing your job. Why should I thank you, right? And he's like, yeah. He said, so you don't have to say thank you, but when you, and of course I'm paraphrasing the conversation, but he was just really taken aback that I thanked him for what he was doing. And I thought, man, you know, so then it became a mission of mine, you know, to like thank people for, you know, just acknowledging them, right? So I say that to say, I think when people look at a firefighter, a cop, ambulance, you know, employee, you don't really, they're just doing their job. When they show up on your worst day, that's what they're there to do. You don't realize that they take that home. You don't realize that, you know, as bad as that may seem for you, they've seen worse. And they've seen a lot of times they've seen those worst calls. And you just can't see somebody suffering and it not change how you feel or look, you know, like in the same way that one thank you to one garbage collector changed the way I look at, you know, the service industry in general. Me seeing one more dead person or severely injured person, or you know, I could just, the list it just goes on and on of different examples of times that I've had to see or be the person to tell someone, sorry, we did all we could, but they didn't make it. That just after a while, man, it almost feels like you're desensitized, but you're not. It's almost like you're hypersensitive to things, you know. It's like everything gets
right. I used to work in news, and I got to the point where we saw so many things that I started to feel extremely guilty to go home, because I stepped into their world, and you see family members, whole world has changed, lost a son, daughter, and I get to go home to my family and just step into that world and step out. And I started feeling, and that's when I started to think about getting out of news, because it was starting to mess me up, because it's just, I had this extreme guilt that I carried home every day.
Oh yeah.
So trauma is a hard thing to, and of course you've been through much more than I ever did in news, but it's a hard thing to deal with, and it's a hard thing to see people suffer. It really is.
It is. You know, so there's a lot of things that we do to cope with it. A lot of different coping mechanisms. Some people turn to drugs and alcohol. Some people turn to fitness, working out, you know, almost all of us. You talk to any police officer, firefighter, EMT, paramedic, emergency room nurse, and they have got the most wicked sense of humor, that gallows humor, because you find yourself in those situations frequently where you've got a couple of choices. You can laugh about it or you can cry about it. Because you're gonna have some emotion come out from it, so you pick. And then of course, now once I learned the you know, actual understood the science of what was going on the neuroscience behind PTSD and what it is. I mean, it's just, I mean, I'm not a super educated guy, but for me, it's just like when you see something like that and you don't know how to. I see somebody do something silly and it's funny. I say, "Oh, that's funny." I file that memory as a funny memory, and anytime something reminds me of that moment, it's funny to me again because it was a funny thing, right? When we deal with all that trauma, essentially what happens in very, very layman's terms, you just don't know how to feel about it, and you don't know how to what Rolodex slot to put that in. So you just stick it in this one box that doesn't really have any kind of designation to it.
Yeah.
And it just kind of floats around in there. And then when something triggers, we use that word, that memory, it's back up again. And you, again, don't know how to deal with it or what emotion to assign to it. One of the things that I've learned is naming it. That makes me mad. You know, I can't tell you how many times I look back at things and recount stories of something awful that I've seen, and it made me mad because that person put themselves in a position to be there, or whatever reason. But anger was the emotion that came to me, or sadness, obviously.
Right.
But yeah, so I mean, it's now that I understand what's going on up there, it's easier for me to kind of step back now at times and be like, okay, I know what's happening here. I'm not,
I recognize this.
Yeah. I also understand what it's like to experience an amygdala hijack. That is, just I've educated myself on this, and I know that, I'm not thinking rationally right now, and I can talk myself down.
What would you tell somebody who, may hear this and are really struggling and have contemplated the act of suicide, or, I don't have a way out, or what would you say to somebody? Hang on. What kind of hope, I guess, would you tell them? How do you deal with it?
It's going to sound almost cliche, but this is what I wound up accepting. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. I don't know how much more plainly to say it. That is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. But I also understand what it's like to feel like that's the only viable option that you have at that moment, that it's not going to get any better, but it will. I know what it's like to be in the throes of a full-blown panic attack where you're dying and you don't know why or from what. And you don't know if it's ever going to end or when or why or any of that. For me, I'm no counselor, but for me, the more I spoke about my issues, the less control they had on me, because the more I tried to not think about them or suppress them, the more they fought for attention. That was all that noise in my head, man. Everything needed to be dealt with, and I wasn't dealing with it. I wasn't giving it attention. It was demanding it. And so the more I've told my story over the years, the easier it is for me to talk about. I got choked up a moment ago just talking about my guys 2-3 years ago. I couldn't have told that story without full-blown crying. It was still that emotional to me. It's a very emotional memory, right?
Sure.
From the worst time of my life. It's a very emotional, raw nerve. To talk to somebody. I was the first person to step up and say, back in the day, me telling you what's wrong with me doesn't make me feel better, and it's never going to make me feel better. But I was wrong. It did. Talking about it, acknowledging it. It's like, I don't ever remember being a kid that was afraid of a monster in the closet or under the bed. But if I were to use that child as an example, I would show them, look, let's go look in the closet. Let's turn the light on and go look in the closet, and then shine a flashlight under the bed and look and see, like, it's not there. It's gone now. There's nothing there. As long as you don't go look in that closet, the possibility of that monster being in there to get you is always there. So that to me was like, just I don't metaphorically opening the closet and looking under the bed
Yeah.
for all my monsters and confronting them head on.
Can't scare them anymore. And I think as men, there's that stigma that we're protectors. We solve problems, and we're not allowed to do. We shouldn't do that because it makes us look weak. But I think it's just the opposite. I think when you're strong enough to confront that and go looking for the monsters and saying, "Here I am," I think that's one of the strongest things you can do. And what you did that night is, that's very strong, and probably I would say one of the toughest things you ever had to do to kind of go in and talk to. Yeah,
absolutely. The most vulnerable moment in my adult life that I ever recall. And I feel so strong and empowered having gone through that. I look back at that moment, and that was me opening the closet and looking under the bed, because I wasn't hiding from anything anymore. And I was saying, look, this is me, boys. I'm toasted. I'm done. I can't fight it anymore. And that was so doing that and coming out to my guys like that and saying, I'm hurting. I'm really in a bad place, was so counterintuitive to me, because I was, you just don't admit weakness or defeat. You just don't, you definitely don't say you don't know how to do something. And I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how. I didn't know what I didn't know, but I knew I didn't know,
Yeah, exactly.
how to fix it, right?
Wow. Jason, man, thank you. Great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Happiness Sold Separately is created and hosted by Jason Hensley and is produced by Makash Films. Music by Soundstripe. Narration by Lauren Gobis. If you or someone you know is in crisis and needs immediate help, call the National Mental Health Hotline at 866-903-3787. We would be honored if you would rate, share, and subscribe. From the entire Happiness Sold Separately team, thank you for listening.